Nobody on Galactic Station Orion 7 paid much attention to the humans. They had arrived 3 months ago as part of cultural exchange, and most species had already decided they were unremarkable. Average height, average intelligence, fragile bones wrapped in soft skin. The kind of species that made other species wonder how they had survived long enough to discover fire, let alone space travel. Ravi Kapoor did not mind being ignored. He liked wandering the station after his engineering shifts, exploring sections that most humans never visited. The station was enormous, built like a wheel with different gravity zones spinning at different rates. Each zone was calibrated for a different species. The Mirati, those tall and hollow-boned bird people, lived in the light sections where gravity barely kissed the floor. The Finn, short and dense like boulders carved into people, occupied the heavy zones where the air itself seemed to press down. Ravi found a multi-gravity training room on a quiet cycle when he had nothing better to do. It was a large open chamber with adjustable settings, and a clear observation window ran along one wall. The controls were simple. A dial with markings in universal numeric script. He read the settings. 1 times Earth gravity. 2 times. 3. 4. 5. 5 times gravity was the Finn training zone, a place where their species exercised under conditions similar to their crushing ocean homeworld. No other species on the station ever touched that setting. Ravi looked at the dial. He looked at the empty chamber. He looked at his own hands. He set to 5. The gravity hit him like a truck made of planets. His knees buckled instantly. His spine compressed, and his vision went gray at the edges. Every organ in his body seemed to slide downward, pulling at the tissue that held them in place. His arms weighed like steel beams. His head felt like a boulder balanced on a stick. He felt his hands and knees. The floor pressed against his palms with the force of a cruel joke. Breathing was no longer automatic. Each inhale required a conscious decision, a deliberate flexing of his diaphragm against the weight of his own ribcage. A normal person would have crawled to the dial and turned it off. Ravi was not a normal person. Ravi was the kind of person who had once run a marathon in the desert because someone at a party had said it sounded impossible. He stayed. Minutes passed. Each one felt like an hour. He focused on breathing, then he focused on his hands, then he focused on pushing himself up to his knees. The muscles in his thighs screamed. His lower back sent sharp warnings up his spine. Blood vessels in his eyes burst, turning the whites pink. 20 minutes in, he managed to get 1 foot flat on the floor. His quadriceps shook so hard it looked like it was vibrating. Sweat poured off him in streams, pulled down by gravity that wanted everything on the ground and wanted it there now. 30 minutes in, he stood, not fully upright. His back was hunched and his arms hung like dead weight. But he was standing, 2 legs, vertical, in 5 times the gravity his species had evolved to handle. He took a step. His foot hit the floor with a sound like a bag of wet sand. He took another step, then a third. Then his body quit. His legs folded and he hit the floor face first. He lay there, breathing in shallow gasps, his cheek pressed against the cold surface. A thin smile spread across his cracked lips. He did not know that he had an audience. On the other side of the observation window, 6 Mirati diplomats stood frozen. They had been passing through the corridor on their way to a trade meeting when they noticed movement in the chamber. They had stopped to watch. Now they could not move. Drell, the lead diplomat, gripped the windowsill with his long, delicate fingers. His feathered crest was flat against his skull, a Mirati sign of extreme distress. His breathing had gone rapid and shallow. 2 of his colleagues had turned away from the window entirely. One was pressing her hands over her eyes. They had just watched a living creature voluntarily crush itself under 5 times its natural gravity. They had watched it struggle and suffer and bleed from its eyes. And they had watched it smile. Drell's translator crackled as he spoke to his assistant in a voice that shook. "Contact the Galactic Administrative Council. Immediately." "On what grounds, sir?" "On the grounds that these humans are insane and someone needs to do something about it before they hurt themselves or traumatize every civilized species on this station." The assistant hesitated. Is there a formal category for that? Find one. 40 minutes later, Ravi was in the medical bay. Noor, the station's human medic, was scanning his legs with an expression that could not decide between anger and awe. He had stress fractures in both shins, micro tears in nearly every muscle below his waist, burst blood vessels across his face and chest. His spine had compressed by nearly 2 centimeters, though it would recover. "You are genuinely the dumbest person I have ever met," Nurse said. Ravi grinned at her from a bed. "I stood up in 5G, Noor. I took 3 steps. You also ruptured something in your left knee that I do not have a name for yet. But I stood up." Nurse stared at him. Then she shook her head and went back to her scanner, muttering about natural selection and how it had clearly failed somewhere along the line. Ravi closed his eyes, still smiling. He did not know that 6 floors above him, a Mirati diplomat was typing the most detailed formal complaint in the history of Galactic Station Orion 7, and that by tomorrow, his name would be known to every species on board. He slept like a baby. A bruised, fractured, slightly compressed baby, but a baby that had walked in 5 times gravity. And that, as far as he was concerned, was enough. The complaint was 14 pages long. Drell had written it in a single sitting, his long fingers trembling over the input console, while his assistant brought him 3 cups of thermal broth to calm his nerves. The document was a masterpiece of bureaucratic outrage. It listed 7 formal charges: willful self-harm in a public venue, infliction of psychological trauma upon observers, conduct unbecoming of a sentient species, reckless disregard for biological limitations, creation of a hostile visual environment, failure to display species-appropriate warning behavior before engaging in dangerous activity. And the 7th charge, which Drell had added after his 3rd cup of broth, general and pervasive insanity. The Talaxi bureaucrats at the Galactic Administrative Council received the complaint and did what they always did. They processed it. The Talaxi were an insectoid species with 12 legs and an absolute devotion to paperwork. They did not care about drama. They cared about forms. And this complaint had been filed on the correct form, in the correct format, with the correct number of supporting attachments. They scheduled a formal tribunal for 10 station cycles from now. Commander Osei found out before Ravi did. She was the senior human officer on Orion 7, a tall woman from Accra with a shaved head and a voice that could cut glass when she needed it to. She read the complaint twice. Then she called Ravi to her office. He arrived still limping, wearing a medical brace on his left knee. He sat down across from her and waited. "You walked into the Finn gravity chamber," she said. It was not a question. "I did. At 5 times Earth gravity." "Yes." "And you stayed for 40 minutes." "About that, yes." Osei pressed her fingers to the bridge of her nose. "Ravi, the Mirati have filed a formal complaint with the Galactic Administrative Council. They want humans banned from all gravity chambers above 1.5 times Earth standard." Ravi blinked. "Banned? For what?" "For scaring them." "I scared them? I was the one getting crushed." "That is precisely the problem. They watch you get crushed, and apparently it was the worst thing they have ever seen." Osei slid a tablet across the desk. "Read charge number 7. Ravi read it. He looked up. "General and pervasive insanity? That is not even a real legal category." "It is now." The Talaxi accepted it. Word spread across Orion 7 the way all gossip spreads on a space station. Fast, distorted, and in every direction at once. By the next cycle, every species on board had heard some version of the story. A human had entered the Finn gravity chamber and refused to leave. A human had bled from his eyes and laughed about it. A human had been smiling while his bones broke. None of these versions were entirely wrong, which made them worse. The Mirati rallied support from the other low-gravity species. The Pelori, a species of translucent jellyfish-like beings who lived in near-zero gravity, released a public statement expressing deep concern. The Vissel, slender creatures who floated more than walked, sent a formal letter of support to Drell. Within 3 cycles, a coalition of 9 low-gravity species had endorsed the complaint. The humans on Orion 7, all 43 of them, reacted with confusion. They could not understand what the fuss was about. Several of them had done far worse things on Earth. One woman had climbed Everest without supplemental oxygen. Another had swum across the English Channel in winter. The gravity chamber thing seemed, to them, impressive but not unusual. This gap in understanding was the entire problem. Nor finished her full medical report on Ravi and delivered it to Commander Osei. The numbers were staggering. Stress fractures in both tibias, 14 separate muscle tears, burst capillaries across 30% of his body surface, temporary spinal compression, damage to his left meniscus that would require regenerative treatment. But here was the part that made Noor pause. She had compared Ravi's exposure time to Fen training data. The Fen, who had evolved over millions of years in crushing gravity, typically trained in 5G for 15 to 20 minutes at a time. Ravi, a soft-skinned primate from a 1G world, had lasted 40. He should not have been able to do that, Noor told Osei quietly. Biologically, he should have passed out in under 10 minutes. I have no explanation for why he did not. Stubbornness is not a medical term, Osei said. Maybe it should be. On the third cycle after the complaint was filed, something unexpected happened. A Fen cargo handler named Boku approached Ravi in the station mess hall. Boku was short and wide, built like a barrel with arms. His skin was gray-green and thick like wet stone. He sat down across from Ravi without asking permission. "You went into our gravity room," Boku said. His voice was deep and flat, like rocks grinding together. Ravi braced himself for anger. "I did. I am sorry if I was not supposed to." Boku stared at him for a long time. Fen eyes were small and dark, set deep in heavy skulls. They gave nothing away. "I train in that room," Boku said. "I have trained in 5G since I was young. My species built for it. Bones like iron, muscles like cable." He paused. "You are built like wet paper." "Thank you. You lasted 40 minutes." "I did." Another long silence. Then Boku leaned forward, and something shifted in those small dark eyes. It might have been respect. It might have been wonder. It was hard to tell with the Fen. "How?" he asked. Ravi thought about it. He thought about the desert marathon. He thought about his grandmother carrying water. He thought about every time his body had told him to stop, and he had simply refused. "I do not know how to quit," he said. "I never learned." Boku sat back. He looked at Ravi the way a mountain might look at a river that had somehow carved through it. Then he stood up and walked away without another word. Ravi watched him go and felt, for the first time since the complaint was filed, that maybe he was not completely alone in this. The tribunal was 7 cycles away. Commander Osei was building a defense. The Mirati were building a coalition. And somewhere in the heavy gravity section of the station, a Fen cargo handler was thinking about a human who did not know how to quit. Drell stood before a room of 200 aliens and played the footage. The observation window camera had captured everything in sharp detail. Ravi on his knees, Ravi shaking, Ravi bleeding from his eyes, Ravi standing, Ravi smiling, Ravi falling. The audience watched in complete silence. When the footage ended, Drell turned off the display and let the silence do its work. "This," he said, his voice thin and careful, "is what we have allowed onto our station." He was tall, even for a Mirati. His feathered crest rose above his narrow skull in shades of pale blue. His bones were hollow. His skin was almost translucent. He had been designed by evolution to live in a world where gravity was a suggestion, not a law. Watching a creature destroy itself under 5 times its own weight had changed something inside him that he could not name. "I have served as a diplomat for 31 years, Drell continued. "I have negotiated with the Fen during territorial disputes. I have mediated between the Taloxi and the Pelori over trade routes. I have seen conflict and resolution across dozens of species. But I have never witnessed anything as deeply disturbing as what that human did in that chamber." He paused. The room waited. He was not forced. He was not threatened. No one asked him to enter. He walked in, set the gravity to a level that should have killed him, and stayed until his body broke. And then he smiled. Drell's voice cracked slightly. He smiled, as if breaking was the point. The low-gravity species in the audience murmured in agreement. The Pelori representative, floating in a specialized containment sphere, flickered with distressed bioluminescence. Even some mid-gravity species shifted uncomfortably. 6 floors below, Boku knocked on Ravi's door. Ravi opened it wearing shorts and a medical wrap around his knee. His face still had faint red marks where the capillaries had burst. He looked tired but alert. "May I come in?" Boku asked. Ravi stepped aside. His quarters were small and plain. A bunk, a desk, a window that looked out at the slow spin of stars. Boku filled most of the available space just by standing there. "I have a question," Boku said. He did not sit because human chairs would have collapsed under him. "Why did you stay? In a gravity chamber?" "Yes." Ravi leaned against his desk. He had been asked this question 3 times now, by Noor, by Commander Osei, and by himself in the quiet hours when sleep would not come. He still did not have a clean answer. "On Earth," he began, "we do things like this all the time. We climb mountains that can kill us. We run distances that our bodies were not designed to run. We dive into oceans so deep the pressure can crush a submarine. We do it because—" He trailed off, searching for the right words. "Because the limit is not the end. The limit is where it starts to matter." Boku was quiet. His heavy face showed nothing. "There is no reward?" he asked. "No territory gained? No resource?" "No. Sometimes there is a medal. Sometimes there is not even that. Just the knowledge that you did it. Knowledge of suffering. Knowledge of surviving." Boku made a low sound in his chest, something between a hum and a growl. He looked at the floor for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was different. Softer. Almost careful. "My people once had a tradition," he said. "Before we left our homeworld. Before we became traders and cargo handlers and practical." He said the word practical like it tasted bad. The young ones would dive into the deep ocean, past the thermal vents, past the light, down to where the pressure would crack their shells if they stayed too long. "Why?" Ravi asked. "To see if they could. To prove they were worthy of the surface. To carry the weight of the deep and come back with it in their bones." Boku paused. "We stopped doing it 4 generations ago. The elders said it was primitive, dangerous, unnecessary. Do you think they were right?" Boku looked at Ravi with those small, dark, unreadable eyes. "I think something died when we stopped." They sat together in silence after that. 2 species with nothing in common except the understanding that sometimes the most important thing a living creature can do is push against what should be impossible and refuse to stop. 3 floors above them, Commander Osei was in her office preparing for the tribunal. She had built a solid legal defense. The gravity chamber had no species restrictions posted. The access panel had accepted Ravi's station credentials without warning. No rule, regulation, or guideline in the entire Galactic Administrative Code prohibited a member of one species from using a facility calibrated for another. She had also reached out to the Fen delegation for formal support. Their response had been polite and non-committal. The Fen would remain neutral. They had no interest in galactic politics. Osei was not worried about the legal case. She was worried about the political one. 9 species had now endorsed the complaint. The Mirati were framing it as a safety issue, not a cultural one. They were smart enough to avoid saying that humans were dangerous. Instead, they said humans were a danger to themselves, which made the other species feel protective rather than threatened. It was a good strategy. Osei respected it. She also planned to destroy it. Meanwhile, Noor found Ravi in the corridor outside the gravity training room. He was standing at the door, looking at the access panel. "No," she said. "I was just looking." "You were not just looking. You have that face." "What face?" "The face you make before you do something that ends with me scanning your broken bones at 3 in the morning." Ravi did not deny it. He had been going back. Not to 5G. He was not suicidal. But he had been training at 3G, then 3.5. Quietly. After hours. Building up the tolerance that his body should not have been able to build. "I need to be ready," he told Noor. "Ready for what?" "For the tribunal. They're going to show that footage and say I almost died. I need them to see that I did not almost die. I survived, and I can do it again." Noor stared at him. She wanted to argue. She wanted to list every fracture and tear and burst vessel in his medical file. But she had known Ravi for 2 years, and she knew that arguing with him was like arguing with gravity itself. "If you die," she said, "I am listing the cause of death as terminal stupidity." Fair. That night, Ravi lay in his bunk and stared at the ceiling. The tribunal was 3 cycles away. Somewhere on the station, a Mirati diplomat was rehearsing his case. Somewhere else, a Finn cargo handler was thinking about oceans he had never dived into. And in a small human quarters, an engineer with fractured shins and burst blood vessels was thinking about his grandmother. She had walked 12 kilometers a day to carry water, not because she wanted to, because the people she loved were thirsty. Some things, Ravi thought, are worth the wait. The assembly chamber of Orion 7 could hold 1,000 beings. On the day of the tribunal, it was full. Species of every shape, size, and atmospheric requirement packed the tiered seating. The Pelori floated in their spheres near the ceiling. The Fen sat in reinforced seats near the bottom. The Mirati occupied an entire section on the left, their pale crests raised in formal attention. And in the center, behind a small table that looked painfully ordinary, sat Ravi Kapoor. 3 Talaxi judges presided from an elevated platform. They were insectoid, with segmented bodies and 12 legs, each folded neatly beneath their robes. Their compound eyes reflected the chamber lights in fractured patterns. They did not care about drama. They cared about procedure. The chief judge clicked her mandibles twice, and the room fell silent. Case number 7741, B. Complaint filed by Diplomatic Representative Drell of the Mirati Consulate against the human species delegation, specifically the individual designated Ravi Kapoor. Charges as listed in the formal filing. The complainant may present. Drell stood. He was composed, his feathered crest held at neutral angle, his translator calibrated for maximum clarity. He had rehearsed this. He walked to the center of the floor and activated the display. The footage played. Every second of it. The chamber watched Ravi crawl, shake, bleed, stand, step, and fall. In the silence of the assembly, the sound of his body hitting the floor was louder than it had been in real life. When it ended, Drell spoke. "What you have just witnessed is not an accident. It is not a malfunction. It is a member of the human species voluntarily subjecting himself to gravitational force that exceeded his biological tolerance by a factor of 5. He sustained fractures. He sustained internal bleeding. He sustained damage that would have killed most species in this room." Drell paused, and he did it for no reason. He let that land. The Mirati Consulate does not bring this complaint out of hostility. We bring out a concern. A species that willingly harms itself without purpose or provocation poses a psychological risk to the broader community. We ask this tribunal to implement gravity access restrictions for the safety of all residents. Polite clicking from the Talaxi judges. The chief judge turned her compound eyes toward the defense table. Commander Osei stood. She was in full dress uniform, her posture straight, her expression calm. She walked to the center of the floor like she owned it. Honor judges. The defense acknowledges that Ravi Kapoor entered the 5G gravity chamber and sustained injuries. We do not dispute the facts. We dispute the interpretation. She activated her own display. The gravity chamber in question is classified as open access. No species restriction is posted. No warning was displayed. Ravi Kapoor's station credentials were accepted by the entry system without objection. He broke no rule, violated no regulation, and harmed no one but himself. She paused, then continued. The complainant describes the human action as purposeless. The defense respectfully disagrees. Humans have a long and documented history of voluntary physical hardship. She showed data. Marathons, mountain climbing, deep-sea diving, Antarctic expeditions. The information scrolled past the audience like a catalog of insanity. These activities are not signs of a broken species, Osei said. They're the foundation of how our species survived and evolved. We come from a world that tried to kill us every single day. We are here because our ancestors refused to stop when their bodies told them to. The chamber murmured. Osei stepped back. The chief judge clicked. The individual in question may address the tribunal. Ravi stood up. He was still bruised. His knee brace was visible under his trousers. He walked to the center of the floor slowly, not because of ceremony, but because his left leg still hurt. He looked out at the chamber. 1,000 alien faces looked back. He had prepared a speech. Commander Osei had helped him write it. It was professional, measured, and diplomatic. He did not use it. My grandmother, he said, lived in a village in Rajasthan. That is a place on Earth. A desert. Very hot. Very dry. The nearest clean water was 12 kilometers away. The chamber was silent. Every morning, she woke up before the sun and walked 12 kilometers to a well. She filled 2 clay pots with water. Then she walked 12 kilometers back, carrying those pots on her head. She did this every day for 37 years. He paused. His voice was steady but quiet. She did not do it because she wanted to prove something. She did not do it because she was insane. She did it because the people she loved needed water, and she was the one who could carry it. He looked at Drell. The Mirati diplomat was very still. Humans do not push past our limits because we are broken. We push because somewhere inside us, there's always someone or something worth carrying the weight for. Sometimes it is family. Sometimes it is a village. Sometimes it is just the idea that giving up is worse than the pain. He stopped talking. He had nothing else to say. The chamber was quiet for what felt like a very long time. Then a sound came from the Fens section. A low, resonant vibration that seemed to rise up from the floor itself. The audience turned. Boku was standing. He was not supposed to speak. The Fen delegation had declared neutrality. But Boku was on his feet, and the sound coming from his chest was not speech. It was something older. The Fen have a word, he said, his deep voice cutting through the silence. We have not spoken it in 3 generations. It is from the old language, from before we became traders and workers and practical people. He paused. The word is Tokrul. It means the courage of the deep, the willingness to carry weight that should crush you, because something at the surface is worth coming back to. He looked at Ravi. We saw Tokrul in that chamber. We have not seen it in a very long time. The Fen delegation shifted. Several of them lowered their heavy heads. One pressed a thick hand against his chest in a gesture that Ravi did not recognize, but felt in his bones anyway. The chief judge clicked her mandibles slowly. The tribunal will recess. Deliberation will follow. The chamber began to empty. Ravi stood alone in the center of the floor, a small human with a bad knee and burst blood vessels, surrounded by the fading echoes of a word that an entire species had forgotten until today. During the recess, the station hummed with conversations in 40 different languages. In the corridors, species that had never spoken to each other traded opinions about what they had just witnessed. The Pelori flickered between shades of confused blue. The Vissel debated in their whispering language whether humans were brave or broken. The Talaxi judges said nothing to anyone and reviewed their procedural notes in silence. In a quiet observation lounge overlooking the station's central axis, Ambassador Yulin found Commander Osei standing alone. Yulin was the senior Mirati official on Orion 7. She was older than Drell, taller, her feathered crest streaked with silver. She moved with the slow grace of someone who had spent a lifetime being careful with her hollow bones. She stopped beside Osei and looked out at the stars. I watched the footage 7 times, Yulin said. Osei glanced at her. Most of your people could not watch it once. I know. That is why I watched it 7 times. I needed to understand why I could not stop. Osei waited. There is a moment, Yulin continued, near the 30-minute mark. Your human is on one knee. His arms are shaking. Blood is coming from his eyes. Every part of his body is telling him to stop. And in that moment, something changes in his face. The pain does not disappear, but something else arrives alongside it. Something that is stronger than the pain. She paused. What is that? Osei thought about it carefully. We call it different things. Willpower, determination, stubbornness. I'm not sure any of those words are big enough. And at the end, right before he falls, he smiles. Yulin turned to face Osei directly. Her enormous eyes were unblinking. Does it hurt as much as it looks? Yes. Then why does he smile? Osei did not have an answer for that. She had served with Ravi for 3 months, and she had never fully understood why he smiled when things got hard. She suspected it was something wired into him at a level deeper than language, deeper than thought. Something that came from a species that had been smiling through pain for 100,000 years because the alternative was despair. I think, Osei said slowly, he smiles because it means he is still there, still conscious, still fighting. The smile is not about happiness. It is about defiance. Yulin was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "My species fears breaking. For us, what breaks does not heal. A cracked bone stays cracked. A torn membrane stays torn. We evolved to avoid damage at all costs because damage is permanent." She looked back at the stars. The idea that a creature would choose to break itself is the most alien thing I have ever encountered. "His bones will heal," Osei said, "stronger than before." Yes, he mentioned that. I find it difficult to believe. It is true. Human bones grow denser at the fracture point. We come back stronger from the breaking. Yulin made a sound that might have been wonder or might have been grief. The tribunal reconvened. The chamber filled again. The three Talaxi judges took their positions, and the chief judge clicked for silence. "The tribunal has reached a decision." She read from a formal document, her mandibles enunciating each word with mechanical precision. On the matter of species access restrictions to gravity chambers, the tribunal finds no existing regulation was violated. The individual Ravi Kapoor accessed the facility through standard protocols. The complaint on these grounds is dismissed. Murmurs from the Mirati section. Drell's crest went flat. However, the chief judge continued, "The tribunal acknowledges the psychological impact on observing species. Effective immediately, all gravity chambers above 3 times standard must display species-specific advisory warnings in all station languages. This is a safety advisory, not a restriction. No species is banned from any facility." The decision was a compromise. The Mirati did not get their ban. The humans did not get a clean victory. The galaxy got warning signs. Drell stood and declared the ruling a failure of galactic governance. His voice was controlled, but his crest betrayed his frustration. The Mirati delegation filed out in formal silence. But something else happened that no one expected. Boku stood again. This time, he held a formal tablet bearing the seal of the Fen Trade Guild. He read aloud in his grinding voice. "The Fen delegation formally recognizes the human species under the designation of Tokral kin." He paused to let the translation systems catch up. "Gravity kin, species worthy of respect in matters of physical endurance. This designation has not been granted in 214 station years. It is not given lightly." The Fen delegates rose as one. They pressed their thick hands against their chests. The gesture was ancient. Most species in the room had never seen it before. Several mid-gravity species approached the human delegation afterward in the corridor. They were quiet about it. A Dravi engineer asked if humans would be willing to share training techniques. A Sorelli medic wanted to study human bone density recovery. A young Pelori, barely old enough to float on her own, pressed her sphere against the observation window near Ravi and blinked at him with what her species used for a smile. Ravi found Drell later. The Mirati diplomat was alone on the upper observation deck, staring into the dark between the stars. Ravi almost walked away. Almost. But something about the way Drell stood, so carefully balanced, so precisely still, made him stay. He sat on a bench nearby. He did not say anything. For a long time, neither did Drell. Then Drell spoke without turning around. "How would your bones heal?" "They grow back thicker at the break," Ravi said. "Calcium deposits build up around the fracture site. It takes a few weeks, but the healed bone is stronger than the original." Drell was silent. Then he made a sound that Ravi had never heard a Mirati make. It was soft and broken, somewhere between a laugh and something much sadder. "Mirati bones do not heal," Drell said. "Once cracked, they remain cracked forever. We carry our breaks with us until we die." He turned slightly. "Your species breaks and grows stronger. Mine breaks and stays broken. Perhaps that is why I filed the complaint. Not because you scared me, because you show me something my body can never do." They sat together for a long time after that. A human and a Mirati. One built to break and rebuild. One built to never break at all, because breaking meant the end. Two species who had nothing in common except the view from the observation deck, and a shared knowledge that they were both very far from the worlds that made them. 3 months after the tribunal, the gravity chambers on Orion 7 had advisory warnings posted in 47 languages. The signs were detailed, precise, and thoroughly ignored by almost everyone who read them. But the chambers also had something new. A schedule. It had started small. Ravi had offered to help a Dravi engineer with basic low-gravity resistance exercises. Then a pair of Sorelli medical researchers asked to observe. Then a group of mid-gravity species showed up one morning and asked if they could try walking in 1.2 times their standard. Then more came. Then more. Within 6 weeks, Ravi was running an unofficial training program that had no name, no budget, and no formal approval. He ran it out of the gravity chambers during off-peak hours, adjusting the settings for each species, designing exercises that respected their biology while pushing them just past comfortable. He was not a scientist or a trainer. He was an engineer who had once walked in 5G because he was too stubborn to fall down. But somehow, that was exactly the qualification that mattered. The Mirati officially boycotted the program. Drell released a statement calling it an extension of the same reckless mentality that prompted the original complaint. The statement was firm and proper and delivered in perfect diplomatic language. But Ravi noticed something. 2 weeks after the boycott was announced, 3 Mirati began showing up to the 1.2G sessions. They came after hours, when the corridors were empty. They did not sign the attendance list. They did not speak to anyone. They simply walked into the chamber, stood in gravity that was barely heavier than their own, and practiced standing a little straighter. Ravi never acknowledged them. He just adjusted the lighting so the observation windows reflected instead of transmitted, giving them privacy. Noor, who noticed everything, said nothing about it either. Boku became Ravi's training partner. They met 3 times a week in the 3G chamber, which was painful for Ravi and comfortable for Boku, but the Finn had started adding weight packs to make it harder for himself. He said it felt right to struggle alongside someone instead of watching from above. Boku taught Ravi a Finn breathing technique called deep stone breathing. It involved expanding the diaphragm in a slow rhythm that matched the body's heartbeat, tricking the nervous system into treating heavy gravity as a resting state. It worked. Ravi found he could last twice as long in 3G with the technique. In return, Ravi taught Boku something the fan had forgotten: how to laugh while suffering. Not at the pain, but through it. A hard exhale that released tension, a sound that told the body this is bad, but I am still here. Boku found it strange at first. Then he found it useful. Then he found he could not stop doing it. The word Tokrel spread, not just on the station, but beyond it. The Fen Trade Guild transmitted Boku's tribunal statement to the Fen homeworld. It landed like a stone in still water. The elders argued about it for weeks. Some called it sentimental. Some called it dangerous. But the young Fen listened. They dug into old archives and found recordings of the deep ocean dives that their ancestors had abandoned generations ago. They watched the footage of young Fen descending into crushing darkness, pushing past what their bodies could handle, and returning to the surface changed. They saw in those old recordings the same thing that Boku had seen through the observation window. Tokrel, the courage of the deep, the willingness to carry weight because something above the surface was worth the climb. A cultural revival began, slowly, carefully, with the elders watching from a cautious distance. But it began. Ambassador Yulin requested a private meeting with Ravi. She came to his quarters, which surprised him, because Mirati diplomats did not make house calls. She brought a small object wrapped in cloth. "This is a memory crystal," she said, placing on his desk. "I recorded your testimony at the tribunal. The words about your grandmother." Ravi looked at the crystal. It was pale blue and warm to the touch. "I shared it with certain scholars on our home world," Yulin continued. "They study what they call impossible species. Species that should not exist based on the conditions of their origin planets." She paused. They have added humans to that list. I'm not sure that is a compliment. It is the highest one we give. Yulin folded her long fingers in front of her. The Mirati fear breaking above all things. Our entire civilization is built around avoidance of damage. We build light because heavy things fall and shatter. We move slowly because fast things crash and crack. We avoid risk because risk leads to ruin. She looked at him. Watching you choose to break yourself and then heal was the most alien thing I have ever witnessed. And somehow, the most beautiful. She left without saying goodbye. Mirati did not do goodbyes. They simply turned and walked away, trusting that the next meeting would come. 16 days later, Drell filed a second complaint with the Galactic Administrative Council. The Talaxi processed it with their usual mechanical efficiency. But this time, the complaint was not a complaint. It was a formal request. Drell asked the council to create a new cultural exchange category called Endurance Traditions, a designation for species that practice voluntary hardship as a form of cultural expression. The filing was precise, thorough, and 14 pages long, exactly the same length as his original complaint. The Talaxi approved it unanimously. They did not care about symbolism. They cared about proper paperwork. And the paperwork was flawless. On the day the new category was announced, Ravi walked into the 5G gravity chamber. He had been training for this. 3 months of work, breathing exercises from a species that lived in crushing oceans. Bone density scans that showed his fractures had healed harder than the original. A body that had been broken and rebuilt, each time coming back a little more stubborn than before. He was not alone. Boku stood beside him, thick and solid, his hands pressed against his chest in the old gesture. Nor watched from the observation window, arms crossed, her face caught between terror and something she would never admit was pride. And near the back of the window, almost hidden in the dim corridor light, 3 Mirati stood watching with their enormous eyes. Their eyes were wide, but they were not filled with horror. Not anymore. Ravi set the dial to 5. The gravity came down on him like a god pressing its thumb against the earth. His knees bent, his spine compressed, his vision narrowed. He breathed, deep and slow, stone breathing, the Fenway. He stood, one leg, then the other, straight, upright, a human being standing in gravity that should have flattened him into the floor. He took a step, then another, then another, then another. He did not fall behind the observation window, nor uncrossed her arms. Boku pressed his hand harder against his chest. And somewhere in the corridor, a Mirati diplomat with hollow bones and a heart full of something he had never felt before watched a small, soft, impossible creature walk through gravity that could crush worlds. And for the first time in his 31 years of diplomatic service, Drell smiled.